So we have, of course, this enormous takeover that's about to happen with Netflix acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery to the tune of a value of $82.7 billion, Sean?
That's the word on the street. That includes debt. So FYI, about $10.7 billion worth of debt coming over from Warner Brothers as well.
The Ankler team has been talking about this all morning here. We've got Natalie Jarvey here from Like and Subscribe. We have the Wake Up's Sean McNulty, who has been on top of this all day. And I'm Elaine Low. I'm an author at Series Business. And we are going to be talking about what this means for the industry, because this is just such a huge shocker. I mean, like, guys, I feel like we've all been talking on Ankler Agenda on the weekly pod about Paramount for so many months now. And all of a sudden, Netflix just swooped in at what feels like the 11th hour and made the deal. Like, to me, this feels like when I'm watching Shark Tank and, you know, the entrepreneurs are like negotiating with the other sharks, right? And like Tim and John is in and Robert Herjavec's in, and they're like almost near a deal. And then at the last second, Mark Cuban swoops in with his billions of dollars and is like, I'll take that deal. And they're like, done. Like, this is kind of what it feels like to me.
Elaine explains deal making 101. Sean, does it feel as surprising to you as it does to Elaine and I? Because it feels like when we talked about this on the podcast, even just this week, but a couple weeks ago as well, like, and I was like, oh, wouldn't it be fun if we had Dune on Netflix? Like, it seemed like such a far-fetched idea. And now here we are. It feels wild to me. But what about to you? Did you see it coming?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have a bit of Paramount Skydance trauma, which went on forever, and then there was the Edgar Bronfman, and then we had Stephen Paul. You know, it just kind of kept going.
All of 2024 talking about Paramount Skydance. I mean,
it was a good chunk of the year where this literally started in October, and it is now the first week of December, and it is. I mean, I'm not calling it done by any means, but it is decided. There is a deal that these two parties have agreed to. So that is, you know, essentially in call it 8 to 10 week period, which is maybe 8 weeks probably in the end between being a public, you know. So I think Paramount sent a letter, I think in September of their first offer letter for this thing, which is really what kicked this whole thing off. This was not, you know, I mean, WBD was surprised to get that offer back in September. So this is call it under 3 month process. So I think that's part of what we have that institutional knowledge from the last Paramount deal, which just never ended. And this one is kind of the exact opposite of that. But Netflix is always, I mean, is serious. I think maybe people were hoping it wasn't. I'll say that out loud.
How seriously did everybody take the idea that Netflix was an actual bidder? For years now, they've said that we are builders. Right? We are going to build things from the ground up. We are not going to acquire from the outside. The most acquisitions we've seen from them are like small gaming studios, really nothing large. And suddenly we have a deal on the scale of nearly $83 billion.
Well, as recently as the Bloomberg Screen Time event just a month or two ago, co-CEO Greg Peters was saying that exact thing. And now here we are. So this is, you know, a huge kind of change in how Netflix has done business. Now Netflix has, you know, changed its mind a lot in the last few years, we could say. So, you know, I guess in that sense, you know, nothing should be off the table with them. But, you know, it definitely seemed it seemed like a far-fetched possibility when we first started talking about this deal, in October.
Yeah, they mentioned the DNA company. It's like Apple, you know, doesn't do these deals either. They still haven't done the deal. You know, that's Apple's bigger than Netflix. So yeah, Elaine, I think you're right. It's just like you're looking at not only the statements, Natalie, as you said, which Greg was on stage there. That was the middle of October saying that stuff, and on the earnings call for Q3 last month, you know, Ted was also pretty nonchalant about, well, X, Y, and Z. And Greg has said these things don't work out too well for people and all this, you know. Which again, Elaine, back to your Shark Tank theory, may have just been this all, you know, kind of smoke and mirror.
Netflix is 100% the Mark Cuban of this, just swooping at the last minute. You're like, done, I will do that deal. And then suddenly it's all over. Suddenly all these negotiations that were happening for what felt like a while before are just done. And you know, I mean, I think the question now is, I've been texting with people all morning, you know, agents, producers, writers, and everybody is just shell-shocked. And the main reaction that I've been getting is people are scared. People are nervous.
Yeah, it should be.
And people are saying this is not, I've heard, quote, not good. awful, really scared. What have you guys been hearing?
Sean, we've got a question in the chat. What's your Uber driver been hearing? How does your
I'll
Uber
get the
driver
the word on the street. I don't know if you watched my CNBC appearance or not, so I don't know, but we should mention there's $2 to $3 billion of cost savings, our favorite word in Hollywood these days. So a lot of things. If this deal does happen, anybody who works on HBO Max is likely out of a job. There's the only thing that the biggest positive is Warner Brothers Television, which Ted on the Wall Street analyst call this morning did sound genuinely positive about. Like, we believe in selling to third parties. Elaine, you and I talked about on the podcast just this week about this topic, and he reiterated that of yep, Warner Brothers TV will still be kind of doing business as usual. Netflix Studios will be dedicated to just Netflix, so they'll be kind of running two divisions there. But movies, streaming, they've been asked about HBO, the most storied and also say important brand in television. There's not a specific plan outlined yet.
Well, let's talk about the HBO and the HBO Max of it all, because this deal is for the studio and the streaming assets, right? Which means you're separating HBO from HBO Max. You will still have HBO as a linear asset that's not part of this deal, right? And then you
I believe it is, because it's under the streaming. It's in the streaming line at WBD. So I think that linear HBO, because I don't think contractually, I don't think you can really separate that out. I don't know how that would even from all the contracts with cable companies. So Netflix will be de facto, I think, running a linear network, so to speak. It's obviously mostly in streaming at this point, but that will be staying, Elaine, I think, to your point. But
well, that's interesting. And I mean, I think the largest question that I've been getting from talking to agents is just sort of what happens to WB as a seller, right? Like, they're the largest, most prolific sort of seller and producer of TV to other streamers and networks. Like, what happens when that goes away? We've already seen so much vertical integration over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I think that's staying. That sounded like that to me. At least what Ted said was there was no indication of we're going to pull back from that or anything. Maybe will it be as robust? We'll see. But they're also projecting a large amount of EBITDA profitability, which that studio between licensing and third party selling is a lot where that money comes from. Not keeping it all in house. So the TV people, I would say, are the TV the WB TV division would be the one place of all right, I think this one will continue on business as usual. Every other division is going to be either eliminated or be having a vast change, movies included, of course. But HBO, again, Greg Peters used the word, maybe some tiering going on. So will it become kind of like the old way where you pay an extra $10 for HBO? Will Casey still be running a division? All these things we don't know, which is, again, this is HBO and this is a deal. This is why people, I think, are so freaked out. It's what are you doing with this thing? And there's not a real answer coming from management on this. It's you have a freaked out town and you've done nothing to assuage any concerns here. It's my personal opinion, but
Yeah, there's a lot of questions still to answer, and presumably now that this news is out there, they'll get to work starting to answer those questions and helping people feel a little bit less scared about the deal. We have a question about how many jobs could potentially be lost. Certainly could be in the thousands. But what Netflix has said is that the deal would result in $2 to $3 billion in annual cost savings by the third year post closing. So that's a lot of job elimination and a lot of merging of these assets.
And that's assuming that all of those passed regulatory muster as well. Senator Elizabeth Warren already this morning is calling it an anti-monopoly nightmare. There's certainly a lot of concern as to whether this is going to be able to pass antitrust, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's Ted was asked about that on the call this morning. He was very, of course, calm and smooth about it. We won't have any problems. But I mean, everybody else, and also Elaine will be covering this. The guilds will be probably pretty vocal about this, I would imagine, in some regard, coming up with the negotiations this summer, which will be right in the middle of all this, government scrutiny going on, because that'll time out, pretty well to that process. But back to that $3 billion, though, Natalie, you're also talking. We have another, I think, $1.5 billion going to come at Paramount. So again, from an industry point of view, and their number was they got up to $3 billion of cost savings in that deal. They've already done again about $1 billion, about 100% on that. But so that's $6 billion of cuts to two of our largest players here. And these Netflix cuts will be by about 2030. So again, this deal won't even close until, let's just say 2027. And then he said over 3 years, you'll see $3 billion of cost savings. So this, back to the mood, Elaine, which you cover and write about so much, that's another, this cloud ain't going away. I mean, that's really kind of the one maybe takeaway right there, Elaine. But
No,
those numbers, $6 billion, a lot.
And when we talk about the layoffs and the job component of this, we've seen numbers from Otis College and Westwood Economics that already we went from something like 140-some thousand jobs pre-pandemic in 2019. That ballooned up during the peak TV period to 168,000 jobs in the industry, in the LA area, I should say. And we've lost 45,000 jobs from peak 2022 to Q1 of 2025. So we've already lost 45,000 jobs in this town over the last 3 years from the come down from peak TV and the dual strikes alone. So, this is not reassuring to anybody who works in the industry who hears about synergies, which, always translates to layoffs. And then you want to talk about the guild side of this. The Directors Guild put out a statement late last night that said that, quote, "We believe that a vibrant competitive industry, one that fosters creativity and encourages genuine competition for talent, is essential to safeguarding the careers and creative rights of directors and their teams." And so the Directors Guild is planning a meeting with Netflix to outline their concerns. I think it's interesting to see the DGA actually put out a statement so quickly, because usually I feel like you see movement from the Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA first on these kinds of issues.
Yeah. No, could be definitely. And Cinema United also came, that's the movie theater owners, which is, a big topic here. They came out with a statement last night as well against this. And that's what I mean. It's going to come down to, Netflix has always prided itself, I think, on being a very talent-friendly place. And if I'm not hearing any talent-friendly kind of reaction to this thing. So that's a challenge there. So, will this have any actual power to do anything? I think is a real question, but it's kind of, I'd say it's put up or shut up time, but it's a little bit of like, if you want to preserve these things, this is your time to fight for it, because that's it, I don't know. Natalie, anything else? Am I missing anything on the guild part?
No, definitely not. It's interesting. Sean, I was going to ask you, did you listen to the conference call this morning?
Most of it. Yeah, I missed the first 8 minutes, but I got most of it. Yeah.
You said they're not doing much to assuage any fears here. What did they say about why they want these assets? What this is about for them? Like, what kind of context or color did you glean from what they said? It was too early for us here on the West Coast, so I.
As I said, I barely caught it in New York. It's like, oh, there's a call. I mean, well, kind of back to your world, Natalie, a lot. The term engagement was really kind of the term that was put out there, like upping engagement. Like, what's this going to do? Because obviously the big topic or big area here is that most people who have HBO Max have Netflix. So you're not really adding a subscriber base, kind of in that sense to it. So what is that? So, okay, if you're not adding subscribers per se, it's about engagement and keeping people, using more of the product. So, whether that comes to fruition or not, I don't know. But that's kind of been if you're asking for the one rationale there, and obviously just the IP and things like that, is great to have inside. They can take those and supercharge them. Look, their distribution is unparalleled. That's, almost a little under 3 times the amount of HBO Max globally. So you have a lot of, firepower. You pour gasoline on a flame like Harry Potter, like, you're going to put it through the roof on Netflix in a sense. But engagement was probably, they want to get that, 8.5% on the Nielsen chart, a little bit higher, things like that. That maybe that was where my mind, they didn't say that, but that's where my mind went on that, Natalie.
Get them a little bit closer to YouTube. We know that Netflix is gunning for YouTube now, sees YouTube as their biggest competitor. So anything that they can do to try to consolidate power. To your point about engagement, one of the things I noted that I haven't seen a ton of conversation about, which makes sense, we're all focused on the film and TV studios, is the fact that they'll also be acquiring the WB Interactive gaming division. It, has been one of the kind of more successful gaming divisions in Hollywood. It's had its ups and downs. But Netflix has been prioritizing gaming a lot more. And that's, a whole part of keeping people within their ecosystem. And if they can build more games off of this IP and, that's interesting. And I think one that we should keep an eye on because Netflix wants to be kind of your everything, it feels like. They want to be how you spend the majority of your entertainment time. And for young people these days, gaming is a big part of that.
Okay, I'm looking at the transcript right now, and Greg Peters says that, in the very beginning, Sean, I don't know if you caught this part, but he said he wanted to take a few minutes to talk about why this deal makes strategic sense for Netflix and for all the stakeholders. And he says, first and foremost, it's the consumers, and this deal provides, quote, greater choice and value for consumers. And he hit on that point a couple of times during that initial part of his remarks. He's saying we're going to attract more fans than they do today. And he says it means, quote, more opportunities for creative talent means more jobs created across the entire entertainment industry. I'm struggling a little bit just on the surface to see how that translates to more jobs, because anytime we've seen mergers and consolidation, that's always meant thousands of layoffs within the industry, within those studios themselves, and then fewer choice for the consumer. I mean, this is assuming, are they going to keep HBO Max and Netflix separate? Like, how is this going to create more choice and more opportunity?
One less buyer too, so it's certainly, you're not going to have Netflix and HBO competing for a project anymore necessarily, unless they do it kind of like HBO did back in the day, where they had the HBO and HBO Max teams competing, and that was flawed, and they did away with that strategy at a certain point. So yeah, I find that to be a little hard to totally understand how we're getting to more jobs in this deal, not less.
Yeah, I think he was more talking about like production jobs, like we're going to make you a lot more show, like not, executive jobs. Clearly not. They're going to be cutting a lot of them. So like, there's no way that's no. So I think he was more talking about opportunities. Talking about the Jersey sound stages. They're going to now have the WB storied lot in Burbank, which they had sounded like that was going to stay, and that was something they loved, having that increased. I think he said increased production presence or something like that. So those jobs, but I don't know that Netflix already makes so much, and between the combo, are you going to make more than HBO and HBO Max and Netflix are making right now combined? I just have a hard time. Again, that was the whole streaming bubble. That's why it didn't work, because there was too much being made. I don't know that
well, every streamer has been trying to figure out what's the least amount we can make to keep people from churning. So, it seems almost impossible that somehow this will suddenly lead to a lot more being made than at these two separate places.
And employment, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We'll have
it's a mystery.
I do think it's interesting, this notion that they've been putting forward that, it could cost less for consumers. I guess it's true. It's one less streaming service you have to subscribe to.
In that sense, you're only subscribing to one instead of both. Yeah.
One, but maybe you still have to pay an extra fee to get HBO on top of your regular Netflix.
Yeah.
I am curious, how ultimately, and this we won't see for a number of years here, how this will trickle down to consumers. Will people feel, oh, it's great, we have one less thing we have to subscribe for? Or will they feel like overall there's just less out there and less serving them? And we haven't even really talked about, will there be, less inventory in movie theaters? I mean, Netflix has said they'll, keep movies in theaters, but
so they've said so far.
This is weak sauce. Elaine, do you have the quotes? I mean, it's pretty weak sauce.
Right. I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but Sean, they've said that they are going to basically honor the theatrical commitments that they have already made, right? But it's what comes next is the question. Are they going to go Project Popcorn on us, or are they actually going to continue with, they're entering an entirely new business. They're entering a business that they've said they don't want to be in, a theatrical business.
They don't believe it. I think it's a term. They don't even think it's a good business. Ted's been very vocal about that stuff. So, it's continuing those things with those existing deals, all that kind of stuff. And again, this deal won't even close until 2027. So this is, again, more of a late 2020s situation. But I think he used the term, more consumer-friendly windows. A lot of emphasis on programming and storytelling for our members as a part of this stuff. So these are not terms that have anything to do with a more robust theatrical window. We'll see. I put a few quotes in the wake up today. You can check that out in terms of what he specifically phrases he used about that. There will be a theatrical component. It's just talking around it, Elaine.
Okay, I've got Ted's comments right here. I'm looking at the transcript now. So somebody asked him about that on the analyst call this morning, hey, you've been mostly avoiding theatrical releases, so what's your plan? And Ted Sarandos says, we've released about 30 films into theaters this year, which is what he said. But I mean, Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of those don't have the theatrical.
That's a handful of theaters with no reporting. Yes.
Yeah, then they haven't had long windows either. And so he says, quote, "It's not like we have this opposition to movies into theaters. My pushback has been mostly in the fact of the long exclusive windows, which we don't really think are that consumer friendly. But when we talk about keeping HBO operating largely as it is, that also includes their output movie deal with Warner Brothers, and which includes a life cycle that starts at the movie theater, which we're going to continue to support. I wouldn't look at this as a change in approach for Netflix movies or for Warner movies for that matter, which sounds reassuring for now for the town.
Yeah, there's more in that. He kept going on that. And then there's other comments about making them more consumer friendly, the windows. That's what I mean. It's like, it's just talking around, is he going to go with, kind of the universal, kind of the 17-day window? There's a lot of, and again, it's just a town looking for some answers right now and not getting anything. And that's where I just feel like you can just tell us what the plan, you've thought this through. If you're going to do, how many movies a year are you going to do? You have to, movies have to map out for, 3 years in advance. The slates for 2028 are already, half set. So that's, again, just this kind of just, as you mentioned, Elaine, these calls you're having this morning all over town, there's this thing, and it's not like
people
it's a
are just
mystery.
freaking out. People are scared.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of answers. Is anything in that statement? Does anybody make, people who love the movie business or want to see it continue, or anything that people were scared about this deal happening that we were all like, well, would Netflix really do this? And now it's happened. Right. That's what I mean. Like, what are you doing with HBO? Like, you can't give me a real answer on, that's just a little like, and then, these are movie businesses that have been around for decades. It's not like, oh, we're going to reinvent these things. It's like, you're going to make a change. What is it? Thank you. Like, that would be great. That's where, I'm getting a little worked up about it. I'm just like, can you just, this is I feel like I'm embodying the town out there, and you're not reading the room. And it's like, that's what's annoying. It's like, you guys are
right.
great.
If you're going to come in with a plan that
who you're
is going
facing
to comfort this town that's already been freaked out for literally the last half decade. When you have seen what the pandemic has done to this town, when you've seen, what's happened with the boom and bust around peak TV, 2 strikes, it's like, this is not a town that needs more disruptive change on this level right now. And also, but I want to go back to one thing you said. What do you mean by long exclusive windows? I mean, Sean, you're the box office guy. I thought windows have only been getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you're talking about. As I said, you're talking about Universal, which is 17 and 31 days. You're talking about Disney, who's again 42. Warner Brothers has generally been on the 31 day, but that's it. Ted didn't even define what he meant by long exclusive windows. Some people would say 31 days is short. Some people would say it's long exclusive. Details would be, again, be nice here. So that's, again, I can't tell you. I mean, that's really the bottom line here. But it's just, you knew what the town would be facing today. And I don't know that anything has come out that's like, they're usually, Netflix is very good at communicating as a company. I really applaud a lot of their efforts. And this is just like, what happened to you guys? Because this is, I know it's day one and like, all right, but by Christmas, it'd be nice to have some sort of an idea of what 2026 looks like.
Could be that, just how short this deal process was, right? They haven't necessarily been able to tee up all those talking points yet. Certainly from where we were yesterday morning to today, things happened pretty quickly in the last 24 hours.
Is it possible to make an $82.7 billion impulse buy? Is that get the checkout counter? Somebody else wants this. Now I got to get on this first.
Elaine, we talk about all these
Black Friday deal.
We're talking about all these people who are scared, and like a lot of them are WGA members, they're SAG members, they're DGA members. Give us your take on what will happen with these guild negotiations next year.
Right, guys, I do have to. I'm out of my ride here, so I'm going to leave you both. So carry on the guild negotiations. Sorry, I do have to go to.
All right, thanks for joining us, John.
Right. Sorry, guys. Thanks everybody. Yeah, exactly. Say bye from my Uber driver. It's very good. Okay, bye.
Yeah, this is exactly the kind of chaotic news day that this is, where people are popping in and out. Maybe let's see if we can get Richard Rushfield on in a little bit. I'm going to ask if he's around right now, but in response to your question, Natalie, and with
we've got a question here about, could the guilds kind of shut things down the way they did, a couple years ago? And
how much leverage do they have left after the last 2 years? Doesn't it feel a little bit like they have expended all of their capital on the strikes to get what they were able to get? And honestly, going into 2026, I thought AI was going to be the big battle that the WGA, the DGA, and SAG-AFTRA were going to have to fight. But now you've got this entirely new piece of chaos that's entered the town.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, this will certainly take some of their attention away from those other fights. I guess the question is whether or not consolidation, more job loss, whether that rallies the town more in a way and allows them to have kind of new leverage, especially with their members, right? The question, I think, really is like, how many of their members are going to want to, shut things down and strike when it's already been such a tough climate for, employment in Los Angeles and across Hollywood the last couple of years. This could be the big existential threat thing that gets people riled up again. But certainly, it doesn't necessarily feel like they've got the same leverage that they did a couple of years ago.
I would say that maybe on this front, though, if we're talking about mergers, and just from what I've been hearing from some of the studio folks and agents that I've been talking to this morning, this sounds like something that folks on the studio side might actually be aligned on with folks on the guild side, which was certainly not the case during the writers and actors strike 2 years ago. But I wonder if so much of the town feels as strongly about it as they seem to be this morning, at least, if that also creates another obstacle for this merger to go through.
Well, yeah, I mean, because the combination of Netflix and Warner Brothers is going to create this real behemoth in entertainment and in streaming. You've got to wonder how the folks at Disney are feeling today about this. Certainly, we know the people at Paramount are not pleased with how this has resulted. Comcast, I mean, suddenly everyone's going to, Netflix has had a target on its back for its entire life cycle in Hollywood, but it will have an even bigger one now going forward. And you do imagine that some of these other companies will want to find ways to, be able to push back and compete.
Mm-hmm. Now, Natalie, you and I have been covering Netflix for a long time now. I want to go back to some historical comments, and that we've also, I remember when we were texting about it yesterday, within the Ankler Slack, but then also we've seen some of these old comments resurface about, what was it, Jeff Fugis, who said it's not like the Albanian army is going to come in and take over the world, referring to Netflix, and now look what's happened in 2025.
Yeah, well, I mean, he kind of opened the gates for the Albanian army to come right in, though, right? He decided to sell Time Warner and, kickstarted really this cycle we've seen for the last, several years that I think ultimately has led to this point. No one expected that Warner Brothers Discovery was just going to sit around, as it was and not, probably become an acquisition target. Those comments definitely not looking so good in hindsight.
The quote that was also ringing around my head last night was, what was it, 2010, 2011, when Ted Sarandos said, the goal is for Netflix to become HBO faster than HBO can become Netflix.
Yeah.
And boy, that was a real inflammatory comment at the time. And now look what's happened.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because in a way HBO is becoming Netflix, but not in the way that Ted, said that it would become Netflix. It's becoming Netflix because Netflix is acquiring it, and that's an interesting quote to think about in the last few years around Netflix, because there was this point in time where we all kind of thought of Netflix as a competitor to HBO, and.
Right.
And clearly Netflix thought of themselves as a competitor to HBO too, to a degree. And it's just become so much bigger than that. Now it's a competitor to Sleep, according to former CEO Reed Hastings. Certainly it's been now a competitor to YouTube. Its ambitions have gotten a lot bigger in the last, I would say 5 years or so. And suddenly HBO seems like such a small piece of the pie, even though, we're all very curious what will happen to HBO within a potential combined Netflix Warner Brothers. Certainly, a lot of questions about what happens to Casey Bloys and all this.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the executive structure. I mean, Casey Bloys, of all the executives, has kind of been the crown jewel exec at WBD, keeping everything running at HBO.
He is, and you have to wonder, does he want to just run a kind of, prestige shop within the larger Netflix ecosystem? Is that an appealing job to him? Does he want to, be in the role that Bela Bajaria currently has? Does anyone at Netflix want him in that role? Those are, I'm sure, a lot of, things that they're going to have to be sorting out internally right now is figuring out kind of how to merge these groups.
Well, and speaking of executives, Channing Dungey used to be at Netflix and was there for 2 years at Netflix, and eventually joined Warner Brothers TV as chair and CEO of that group. Now something of a homecoming, I guess, now that she's back in that ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question in the chat about was Netflix treat HBO like Hulu treats FX, which is something to think about. Does Casey Boys want to be John Landgraf in that situation? John Landgraf has carved out a really good little fiefdom for himself and seems pretty content being in control of that. Is that appealing to Casey? We don't know. It would be great.
Right. I mean, I think that's a very apt analogy, because it's like we've certainly seen John Landgraf as, the mayor of TV. He's certainly been a survivor through all of the different mergers, and when, Disney acquired Fox and went through all of those gyrations. And like you said, has just had this nice little fiefdom where he's controlling a very valuable asset for Disney, but has largely been able to kind of do his own thing. And I think we've seen Casey Boys as a real survivor through all of these different transactions that Warner Brothers has gone through over the last 5 years. I mean, how many different corporate owners has Warner Brothers had in the last 5 to 7 years? Like at least 3.
Oh my gosh,
And is also seen as somebody who is a tastemaker in this town, and that's something that Hollywood still values very deeply. So I could easily see something like that, like Casey Boys being that version of a John Landgraf. Especially as we ask ourselves, are these people who necessarily have higher aspirations? And I don't know that actually being at the top of the food chain at any studio is actually, or the entire corporate parent is actually that appealing anymore.
Certainly puts a big target on your back, right? Those are not, roles that people traditionally stay in very long anymore. So there's something compelling about just making, the shows and the TV that you love to make and not worrying about the rest of it. We'll have to see.
Yeah. And our own Lesley Goldberg here with a great question about, do they have a line to Ted in a new structure? Do they report to Bella? All TBD as to how separate these divisions are going to be and what those creative minds, how those creative minds are going to be aligned, in a hierarchical structure now. But that is just, there's a lot of talent under one roof now.
Absolutely. Well, and I can't help but be a little worried, not a little, a lot worried about, in this kind of merger, a lot of that talent is not going to ultimately end up under one roof. Some people are going to choose to exit or be, laid off, and you're going to have a lot of really, really great people on the job market at an already really tough moment for jobs in this town. Now, I'm sure Casey Boys would have no problem finding a job elsewhere if he wanted to, but it's still, you have to think about all these people who have built their careers doing this, and now their fates are very uncertain.
Right, and we've written too about the impact this has on people's careers, especially when you look at Gen X. And a lot of this town is made up of Gen Xers, very talented Gen Xers who have been working in this industry for the last 20 years, who, have sort of expected to be able to get to a certain point in their careers. But it's made that much harder when you're somebody who's in a, mid to senior management level position, and the town just keeps shrinking and closing in on you and squeezing out so many of these historically high performers. So what happens to all of that talent at this point?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they're all asking that question too. It's certainly, it's a tough time out there if you're a mid-level development executive.
Right. And then even when you're thinking about the next generation, we talk a lot about what Gen Z is experiencing right now as people who have only just entered the business. And a lot of them have only entered the business during the pandemic and have had a very different, strange experience of this. It's is there even any incentive anymore to be part of Hollywood? And I think the town really has to ask itself, what impact does this have on talent retention? What impact does this have on talent acquisition when you have an industry that's already shrinking and then, folding in on itself and squeezing out, longtime members?
Yeah. And so many of those entry level jobs are going away anyway because of AI. So you start to, wonder just, where is the next generation of leaders in Hollywood going to come from? And what will that look like? I don't know that that's a problem that the, 60, 70-year-old executives in charge of these places are all that worried about. They're going to presumably be long gone before that really becomes an issue. But it's something that, they should be thinking about. And, there need to be, initiatives and programs in place to get young people in the door of Hollywood and train them up in these roles so that they can, take over the industry one day.
No, absolutely. And then something else that I was thinking about is like, okay, so you have Netflix who produces all of these shows for itself. Like, is there any chance now that they will own a studio that sells to other buyers, would Netflix consider also selling to outside streamers and networks? If this is something that a part of their company is going to eventually, it is already doing, why not jump in, right? Speaking of jumping in, we have Lesley Goldberg here, fellow series business writer. And I know, Natalie, you have to hop off soon.
Yeah, I need to step away. But I'll just say on that note, it's interesting from what we heard from Netflix executives this morning. They were, drawing a line between what they've done with Netflix historically and what what Warner Brothers has done historically. Will they keep those divisions, and what will that look like? And will they consider kind of the Netflix brand and what that means to people already kind of sacred, and maybe not do what you're describing, Elaine, which is for you, Lesley. Maybe could Netflix start selling to outside buyers? What would that look like? This is where, to Sean's earlier point, we have a lot more questions that they're going to have to answer over the next few weeks. I'll guys from there. Bye.
Thanks for joining, Natalie. Hey, Lesley.
Hey, Elaine. Okay. Thanks for having me.
Now I feel like we went from really big top down, like we got the business end, 30,000 foot view from Sean, and then, the sort of like digital side from Natalie. Now you've been, enmeshed in this business for so many years now. Like, what does this say to you when you're thinking about this from the TV side and from the production side of things?
When I first heard this and last night, and I've been battling a sinus infection, so forgive me if I sound terrible. But when I first heard this last night, my first thought was, I remember when in 2017, when we made a huge deal, when Shonda Rhimes like upended the industry when she left her longtime deal at Disney to sign an exclusive overall with Netflix. And we thought that was such a huge deal because that was a sign that Netflix wanted to own all of its content. Well, Netflix just inherited, if this deal closes, overall deals with J.J. Abrams, Greg Berlanti, Chuck Lorre. Like, we did these stories back at the time of saying, who's next? Who will be the next person to take the Netflix money? And now it's an all-star team. Like, there's just, I have a hard time wrapping my head around just all of the deals that they've inherited, all of the massive IP that they've inherited. And I have a lot of questions like you about what this means for the nature of these overall deals. If there will be any of these writers who will say, no, I don't want to do this. I would rather be elsewhere. But, just to rewind a couple of minutes ago, you guys were talking about if they'll continue to sell to third-party buyers. Mm-hmm. What if they, not only that, but will they continue to buy from third-party buyers? Let's not forget that.
Right.
Because, when you look at it, like Emily in Paris is a Paramount show, right? Mm-hmm. Dead to Me, Paramount show. Never Have I Ever was a Universal show. Like, there are scores of shows that Netflix bought from these outside buyers.
But if you have WBTV now, if you have the most storied TV studio in town under your corporate umbrella now, do you need to bother?
Right. Do you need to buy like a Mrs. Davis? Right. Like, that was at the time, like, that was a show that was on Peacock that Peacock bought from Warner Brothers. That was the Damon Lindelof show. That was sadly a one and done. Brilliant, but one and done. But now you're at a point where Netflix isn't going to need to do that. So this is going to me, it's a question of how much are they going to vertically integrate? You brought this up earlier, right? We've been in this vertically integrated landscape for a long time. I remember the TCA, I think you were there too, when Kevin Riley, who was then overseeing what would become HBO Max, said, we want to keep our prized assets for our own platform, which alluded to taking Friends back from Netflix and having that anchor what would become HBO Max. Well, Friends is basically going back to Netflix now. So now my question, in addition to, if Netflix is going to be a buyer from third-party studios like Universal and Paramount, but what happens to the syndication market? That's a huge question. What happens, hypothetically, that Netflix says, okay, well, we own ER. And we have Grey's Anatomy, which is already snapped ER's record as the longest running primetime medical drama. Hulu has rights to ER. What happens if Netflix says, you know what, we're going to take ER back? Or if they go a step further and say, well, all these linear cable networks are being propped up right now by syndicated repeats. We know Big Bang Theory is a massive asset for TBS. That made sense, right? TBS was in the Warner fold. Not anymore. What happens if Netflix says, you know what, we have all these new Big Bang Theory shows coming up, right? What's the one that's for Max or Netflix? Stuart Saves the World.
Right.
If they say, you know what, we're not going to have Big Bang Theory air on TBS anymore, we're going to have Big Bang Theory exclusive to our platform.
Now, again, this deal is just for the streaming assets and for the studio, but it very much so puts Netflix in a traditional linear business through all of these other avenues that you're talking about, right? Like the reruns you see on TV late at night on linear, on broadcasting.
Yeah. How many people fall asleep watching Friends on Nick at Night? I used to be in that category. But what happens if that show disappears? What happens if all these Warner Brothers shows that were sold into syndication, if Netflix pulls a Kevin Riley and says, you know what, we're going to keep them all. And we're going to hike our price to $50 a month, but you will have exclusive ability to watch Friends, ER, The West Wing, every other prized Warner Brothers property exclusively on Netflix, and you can't find it on linear, and you can't find it streaming elsewhere. I'm paying $50. I don't know about you.
Yeah,
right?
and
but
let's talk about the consumer part of this too, right? Like everybody's already subscribing to anywhere between 3 and 5 streamers per person. Sure, in the sense that those two, Netflix and HBO Max, might combine, and that might only be one more bill in your monthly subscription plans, might sound good. But that also, doesn't that give Netflix a lot more pricing power in order to be able to hike those prices as they see fit year after year? They're already the dominant streamer in the US. They've made clear their lead in streaming over the past so many years. That's it seems a little bit monopolistic on people's wallets.
I mean, a little bit. I was talking to a source late last night, and we were talking about, there's the rule of 4, right? The theory that there's only going to be 4 streaming services to survive. Is it 2 now?
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. If we have Netflix and HBO Max, let's assume they'll combine.
There's one.
Right? Yeah, there's one. And then
we already know Netflix has the seat at the table, and Disney was the other, right?
Yeah,
and the
Disney
other
Plus is
Disney
huge
Plus.
and is probably the only other major brand, major studio that I can think of that can really have that kind of hard protection around their property, because it's Disney, because they're just built that way. But outside of that, who's the third? Do you really have any other major players?
No.
Amazon, by virtue of the number of Prime subscribers they have, but there's always been that question of how many Prime customers are watching Prime Video, right? Like there's that weird overlap.
Who subscribes to Prime just for the video component?
Right.
Not a lot.
And we know it's not Apple TV Plus.
No.
That's the smallest prestige player. Peacock, Paramount Plus, these are all much smaller players. Some of them
you're going to have to see another, the next question becomes, what's the next tile to fall? Does this now mean that Paramount needs to shift over and say, you know what, Comcast, let's merge, and the two of us together, we can form a real player to rival Netflix Brothers or whatever we're calling this merged company.
I think Netflix Brothers is what people have been going with this last day and a half. It's got a nice ring to it, right?
I mean, it's creepy, but
yeah, creepy.
Right. So does Apple buy Disney?
Well, if you ask Richard Rushfield, that's in the long game.
That's where my head is among other things. You can see my insane scratches back here, but my other questions too is really, I'm fascinated by what happens with all of these showrunners. It was such a huge deal when Netflix had Shonda and Ryan, who of course went back to Disney, but who has the scale? Who has the breadth of showrunners? I did this story in October, looking at the showrunners who define the industry right now, like what shows define the industry right now. And half of them were from Warner Brothers. Quinta Brunson, now a Netflix employee. Greg Berlanti already had his film deal at Netflix. Now his TV deal is going to be there. Chuck Lorre, the biggest voices in comedy, easily one of the most influential and probably one of the richest, also now at Netflix.
Right.
It's the scale is insane. And then you think about not just the library titles, the IP, like Lord of the Rings. Amazon's making this crappy Lord of the Rings show, right? It's a Warner Brothers property. Netflix could sit here and say, okay, well, you have the rights to this tiny little corner of the Lord of the Rings franchise. Well, we're going to do the actual part that you want to see. You know what I mean? Like the Harry Potter show that's being made for Max.
Oh my God. The first thing,
show.
By the way, when I mentioned this to my 10-year-old this morning, I was like, I'm really busy this morning. Netflix says they're going to acquire Warner Brothers. And the first thing he says is, so does that mean Harry Potter's going to be on Netflix? Because Harry Potter was produced by Warner Brothers Motion Pictures. And I was like, first of all, very good. You
get an A. A plus.
Yeah, A plus for this.
You get
Second of all, yeah. That's the question that viewers are going to be asking, right?
Yeah. I mean, all of these things are going to be like, the other things that I'm thinking about is what does the Netflix home screen look like? And, once this deal closes, totally different. An HBO tile. Well, that's not enough. Look at all of the properties that they're going to own. Just thinking about the animation space alone, which you recently wrote about so perfectly. But like Rick and Morty is now a Netflix show. Right?
Yeah.
Scooby-Doo, Hanna-Barbera, Looney Tunes, like the amount of massive intellectual property that Netflix is buying as part of the studios is, I can't think of a word to describe it. It's monumental. What's bigger than that? Like, as our colleague Abby is noting, like Netflix's most successful properties, Gilmore Girls, Friends, all WB shows, those are all coming home. And they have the rights to make more. They don't have to sit there and say, okay, Warner's, can we make a day in the life of the Gilmore Girls and figure out what that looks like? And they can go directly to the source. It's up to them now once this closes. Anything else they want to touch. If they want to bring Joey back.
Oh my God.
What's Matt LeBlanc doing right now? I mean, they have the right. They will have the right to do all of this stuff.
And what does that mean for the folks who work at these companies, both on the studio side and the writers and producers? And Natalie and I talked about this a little earlier of how I'm curious to see if this will actually align people on both the buyer and seller side on what this means for the health of Hollywood, especially as you see there'll be less competition, right? We saw Channing Dungey leave Netflix, eventually join WB-TV. Now they're going to be part of the same company, assuming that this deal goes through. How many times have you seen folks, leave one place for a sweeter overall deal at a different place? You won't have that kind of competition between Netflix and Warner Brothers anymore. There's less competition for the town. And what does that mean for people's paychecks?
I mean, we've also been in a landscape where a lot of the paychecks have been getting smaller. Historically, the rich overall deals have, a lot of them, like J.J. Abrams re-upped at Warner Brothers, but it's no longer an exclusive overall deal. It became a first look, those are more inexpensive. They're more cost effective. But that's, I had one showrunner source saying, do all of these overall deals vanish? Do they all just become first looks? Because how much content does Netflix need? And yes, Richard, I'm sorry, I used the C word, but how much programming does Netflix really need? Because, they could easily just put on all these acquired shows and, hey, here's a West Wing, we're going to promote the hell. It's July 4th. Here's the West Wing. We're going to do put this on your homepage. They have the ability to do whatever they want with one of the biggest, with more than 100 years of property from Warner's. Like it's, like I said, it's such a massive deal that I can't wrap my head around it. And what this means for writers, yes, maybe fewer opportunities, but maybe more. Maybe Netflix will sit there and say, we have all of these rights. We're going to do live podcasts. We're going to hire former writers who worked on Gilmore Girls to do a podcast version of it.
What incentive would they have to do that if they are already the dominant streamer in the US and pretty much anywhere? And if they don't have to spend more money to do that? TV shows are not cheap.
I mean, well, sorry, what was your question? What happens if why do they need to do that?
Yeah, like what incentive would Netflix have to say, let's create more? Because we saw more in peak TV, right? We hit 600 scripted shows in 2022. And then the town said, no, more was not the answer. So,
well, that's because everyone was making more because they needed to compete with Netflix. And now you're seeing these companies going, well, Netflix, please continue to sell us Abbott Elementary. If you're Disney, you're like, can we pay you to keep Abbott Elementary on ABC? I think the opportunity to make more is, why wouldn't you? Like this move to me, the acquisition is as much of a defensive one for Netflix as it is an aggressive one.
Intriguing.
Right? Like, think of it this way. If Paramount was victorious with Warner Brothers, Now that's a Netflix rival.
Right.
Right. They just wiped out Paramount. They just wiped out Comcast. Right. Like there's no rival to Netflix anymore with this acquisition.
Right.
And
They've cemented their status completely, especially now having this studio within their system.
And historically, go back and look at what the Fox acquisition did for Disney. Mm-hmm. Right. Like Dan Fogelman.
Look what it did to Fox.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's going to be what's left of Discovery. Right. So.
Well, I think that's what people are worried about. They're saying, is Warner Brothers going to look like what the remnants of Fox looks like within a Disney? Because Warner Brothers is obviously much larger than Fox was, but like, how much of a diminishment do you think we might see of a Warner Brothers within a Netflix?
To me, I don't think you're going to see a diminishment. I think it's such a storied studio with so many incredible deals and executives who have obviously weathered this storm multiple times in the last couple of decades. But when you look at the volume of programming, the volume of showrunners that they have, to me, like who's going to compete? You need to scale up, right? And I see your point, in terms of what's left of Fox, but don't forget, when Disney acquired Fox, the 20th Television Studio was part of that. Dan Fogelman was their, at the time, one of their biggest showrunners, and he still is. He's only gotten bigger after going back to Disney, right?
And we're certainly seeing Dana Walden on the Succession track there, speaking of other Fox alum.
Right. So who's on the Succession track at Netflix now? Is it Chang Dungy? Is it Casey Bloys? Is it both of them? You touched on that. What does the executive structure look like? Like I have so many questions, but to me that, I'm honestly a little bit excited by this just to see what they do, because in the same way that what the Fox acquisition did for Disney in terms of scale, in terms of the showrunner deals, in terms of the IP, The Simpsons alone, right? Like, look at what that's worth. Well, Netflix just acquired, 50 or 60 different versions of The Simpsons? Hit after hit after hit, showrunner after showrunner after showrunner. This is, they are going to be, like, they already won the streaming wars. Now they're the kings of Hollywood, like, so what's stopping them from doing more with all
that? Might be the most optimistic I've heard all morning.
I mean, I'm an optimistic person, so sorry about that. But, it's...
Well, I'm curious, what have you heard? What have you heard from the people? Like, I've uniformly just heard people who are freaked out this morning. Like, what have you been hearing from people you've been talking to since yesterday?
I mean, mostly what I'm hearing is relief for a lot of people within WB, because they've been through the ringer so many times. And how many different versions of layoffs and realignments and everything else and restructurings that have they had to go through? What does this look like? What does it mean? Is this finally the end of the road when it comes to these employees who have been like, well, who's our boss this year? Is this it for them? Will Netflix take any of these divisions and spin it off? I mean, I touched on the power, the breadth and the scope of all the animation titles. They could easily spin off an animation company and license out all of those. Like the talent wars for kids programming. Well, you just got some of the biggest IP in animation. That could be its own company. To me, there's a lot of opportunity here.
So we've heard your greatest hope for this deal. What's your greatest concern with this deal?
The people, honestly, that's, this is, the industry has been through the ringer, as you said, over these past 5 years with COVID and the dual strikes. How many more layoffs are we going to see? I think you quoted the studies from Otis about
we've lost 45,000 jobs in the last 3 years.
And there's more coming, and this era of mergers and consolidation and acquisitions is not over. This is not going to be the last shoe to fall. There will be more. So what does our landscape look like in 5 years? Is it going to be, is this the theory that there will be 4 streamers to survive? Is it going to be 2? Are we going to go back down when television first started? How many networks were there?
Well, what are the big 3 of streaming now?
Are we going back to those days where it's really just there are 2 shows in town and that's it? So that's probably my biggest fear.
Well, on that note,
what about you, Elaine?
Well, like I was saying earlier, I worry about the people, right? Like we've seen so many layoffs already. We saw layoffs at Paramount, right? Like Paramount and Skydance just merged. Anytime you have a merger, you have layoffs. It is inevitable. Like, have we ever seen a merger that has not immediately resulted in the layoff of several thousands of people in the town?
And there will be redundancies here, obviously.
Yeah. You're going to see back office redundancies and legal and marketing and all the administrative part. You're going to see it in the executive suites on the creative side, the folks who work in development. And then you're going to have that whole realignment on the development side, right? Like anytime you and I covered the development market in detail, anytime there's a merger, suddenly it's like, oh, what does this buyer want? Well, I don't know. We have to wait and find out. We have to wait for the dust to settle. That's been the through line for Paramount as a buyer this past year and a half, right? Anytime you talk to them, you're like, what does Paramount want? The agents throw up their hands and they're like, well, we don't know because we have to wait until Ellison and the Skydance team comes in and figures things out. And there was finally a lot of optimism, which you've written about extensively, like when Cindy Holland came in, and so it felt like we were going into 2026 with some optimism, with some momentum. And now we're going to be going into 2026 with another giant merger question mark hanging over our heads. And that part is not good for the town.
Yeah. And as much as people are rightfully excited to have Cindy Holland and Paramount be another buyer, I think with this deal, Netflix doesn't need to buy from third parties. So, posing the question, what does Netflix want to buy? It doesn't matter because they have everything. They have all the showrunners. They have all the IP. They'll make whatever the hell they want. and they're not going to buy from outside. What reasoning do they have?
Right. And they don't have to pay as much as they used to. I mean, we all know that Netflix has the deepest pockets in town and they've been willing to spend money. And even if they've pulled back on that a little bit in recent years, they've still been known as the buyer who is making the most buys and is willing to spend a lot of money. Like, of course, there's Apple TV Plus, which is willing to shell out big gobs of money, but only for like very specific A-list package talent. That's not necessarily the case at Netflix. We've still seen that wealth distribution essentially in the buying and selling market. And they really don't have to. I mean, they almost didn't have to before. They really don't have to now.
Mm-hmm. And, as I think about more and more elements of this deal, what happens if Netflix sits there and says, all these big shows that we produced, that Warner Brothers produced for other platforms. Let's use Ted Lasso as an example, right? Emmy winner. And if Netflix says, you know what, we don't want to make this for Apple, we want to make it for ourselves. That decimates Apple. Mm-hmm. Right? What if they do the same thing across everywhere, not just syndicate, the syndicated shows? What if they take all of the WB stuff and say, these are all of our toys and we're going to keep them exclusive to our playground?
Mm-hmm.
What does
can you imagine
cable look like? What does Apple look like?
Reel in all the fishing lines.
Look at the big gaping hole on ABC if they take the entire Bachelor franchise away from ABC and Abbott Elementary and anything else that Warner produces. They strip The Voice from NBC. Like, we haven't even touched on unscripted, like these are massive. This is a massive part of the entire TV ecosystem that is now going to have the possibility to be 100% exclusive to Netflix. If I'm a Netflix exec, that's the first thing that I want to do. Right. I mean, you turn your back on a huge revenue stream from syndication, but at the same time, who doesn't pay to have Netflix? Not just domestically, but internationally.
Counterpoint, a lot of the Netflix, because Netflix has become so traditional over the years, they are no longer this Silicon Valley, like Los Gatos startup anymore, right? Like they have so many veterans of legacy Hollywood baked into their system that I think perhaps, the upside of looking at this is you have so many people who come from the traditional legacy TV space that they won't necessarily let something like that happen. I mean, you look at the top of the food chain on non-scripted, like Brandon Reed comes from NBCU. You look at Bella, from NBC. These are people who have linear experience and understand how that ecosystem works. And I would think would be loath to want to really throw a huge wrench in that.
Yeah. And that's, again, a huge question. But Netflix has never been in the syndication market. So now that they are with the acquisition of Warner Brothers, does this mean that you could take a House of Cards and say, you know what, that's a good show for TNT. Let's license House of Cards to TNT. These are all revenue streams that are just going to make the rich richer.
No. Well, for now, more questions than answers. If anybody watching or listening has thoughts, email us at podcast@theankler.com. I'm at Elaine@theankler.com. And Lesley, you're at?
leslie.goldberg@theankler.com.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Much, much more to come. Leslie, you and I will have more for the upcoming week's series business newsletter. So everybody make sure you're subscribed to theankler.com. And thanks for joining us. Boy, what a time.